Inside a Brooklyn federal courtroom in the summer of 1989, 12 citizens sat with the weight of a nightmare on their shoulders. The jury had heard more violence than most people encounter in a lifetime. For weeks, they listened to stories of bodies left in basements, workers beaten over missing money, and innocent people being pulled into the chaos simply because they lived too close to the war. And sitting across from them was the man prosecutors said sat at the center of it all, Delroy Edwards, but Brooklyn knew him by another name, a name strong enough to stand alone, simply Uzi. The name coming from his weapon of choice he carried under his trench coat that became his street signature, his warning sign, and his legend. Then the verdict came down, guilty. And before those jurors could even leave the courthouse, they asked the judge one question that told you everything about the man they had just convicted. Who was going to protect them? Because Delroy Edwards wasn't just another dealer from the 80s. He was the man prosecutors said helped bring crack to Bedford-Stuyvesant. A Jamaican-born street enforcer who came out of Kingston's political wars where violence was power. And by the time that power reached the streets of Brooklyn, it came wearing a trench coat and carrying an Uzi, on a mission to build one of the most violent drug posses New York had ever seen. Before Brooklyn knew him as Uzi, Delroy Edwards was a poor kid growing up in the poverty-stricken neighborhoods of Kingston, Jamaica. The kind of place where the zinc rooftops trapped heat, politics spilled onto street corners, and where survival wasn't an idea, it was a daily job. This was the Jamaica never seen on postcards. In the 1980s, politics in Jamaica could be just as dangerous as the drug trade. Rival political camps fought for control of communities, and entire blocks became loyal to one party or the other.
Within the area, there are two distinct ghettos. The PNP stronghold with the unlikely name Tel Aviv, and its neighbour Southside, which is unequivocally JLP. Separating the two is Rosemary Lane, the front line.
A young man could grow up surrounded by campaign posters, armed enforcers, hungry families, and the feeling that every election was less about ballots and more about territory. It's alleged that Delroy Edwards was about 20 years old when he became tied to that violent political world as a street enforcer connected to Jamaican Prime Minister Edward Seaga's Jamaican Labour Party. So when America later saw men like Delroy Edwards as sudden monsters of the crack era, they were only seeing the final product. The ingredients were mixed long before. It's when a young man learned that a name could protect you, a weapon could feed you, and fear could open doors that opportunity never did. And then the political heat got too hot. After Seaga's victory, law enforcement pressure increased with some Posse members leaving Jamaica for the United States.
Most of the Posse members come from the violence-torn slums of Jamaica and have slipped illegally into the U.S. to take advantage of the booming drug trade.
Delroy Edwards was one of them. He slipped into America on a tourist visa and eventually landed in Brooklyn. When Edwards arrived in Brooklyn, the city was already changing fast. The old heroin economy was still there, but crack was different. A vial could sell for $5 and bring a customer back again and again. It turned apartments into storefronts, stairwells into markets, and whole blocks into open-air businesses. New York in the mid-'80s was fertile ground for men who understood fear, and Edwards definitely understood how to instill fear. He started out selling small amounts of weed from a neighborhood storefront, but by the beginning of 1985, he had learned how to make and sell crack. After that, weed was old money. Edwards saw the future and dived head first into it. It's alleged that he was one of the first dealers to sell dope in Bedford-Stuyvesant, with his organization of mostly Jamaican-born members operating dope houses in Crown Heights, Flatbush, and other Brooklyn neighborhoods. They became known as the Rankers Posse, or Southies by others, and what might have looked like chaos at street level was ran like a business from top down. At its height, prosecutors said Delroy Edwards' organization brought in as much as $100,000 a day. In a neighborhood where mothers were stretching grocery money and old heads sat on stoops watching their blocks change overnight, that type of money bought silence and loyalty. Working out of Brooklyn, Edwards' organization later expanded into Washington, D.C., Baltimore, and Philadelphia. The money flowing in was enough for Edwards to buy a 2-story property allegedly in cash, with a manicured lawn and a sunken swimming pool in the back, worth about $500,000 in Long Island. Sitting in the driveway was the 1987 Mercedes 300E that was also bought in cash. Delroy Edwards wasn't just a corner boss anymore, but expansion brought enemies. And Edwards answered enemies the same way he answered disobedience, with violence. His lieutenants opened operations outside New York, where crack could sell for more and competition was less prepared. The logic was simple. buy low and sell high somewhere else. And if anyone resisted, make an example out of them. According to prosecutors, his crew didn't just defend territory, they terrorized people inside and outside their own organization. Workers suspected of stealing were beaten, rivals were shot, and anybody in the way was collateral damage. Delroy Edwards' reputation became one of the most feared in Brooklyn. By the mid-1980s, Jamaican posses had become a national law enforcement obsession. Federal agencies weren't just seeing drug cases, they were seeing migration patterns.
They're every law enforcement officer's nightmare. They're people with tremendous amounts of disposable cash. They have a network internationally, and they're people without any backgrounds. They're people without paper trails.
Weapon cases, fake passports.
They would not really trust any of the local Americans here to work. What they would do is recruit their own people from back in Jamaica, in the Kingston area, surrounding neighborhoods. They would bring their own people up here to the United States using false passports or green cards for whatever reason to travel. Bring them here, and the new people that would arrive would now become the workers on the street actually selling the drugs.
But for Edwards, the money coming in was too good to slow down. By 1987, his organization was in open conflict with rival crews, one of which involved Donald Smallwood's gang, known as the Wild Bunch. The dispute came down to who would control the territory around Pacific Street and Ralph Avenue in Brooklyn. Once the smoke cleared, 6 people were left dead and several wounded. Another conflict with a rival Jamaican posse in Flatbush, known as the 40s, claimed more than a dozen lives. Another incident that stood out was that of Norman Egghead Allwood, who was a younger worker for the Rankers posse. Edwards' second-in-command, Kenneth Bud Manning, would later testify that the teenager was tortured after stealing from the organization. Manning alleged that Allwood was taken to a dope spot's basement on Pacific Street in Brooklyn. There, he was smacked with baseball bats, chained, and left hanging from a ceiling beam. His body was later found wrapped in plastic dumped in a New York tenement. More than punishment, this was a warning meant for the streets and any other worker. It showed that the man they called Uzi didn't need to be present on every corner for people to feel his presence. One of the most infamous allegations against Edwards involved the July 4th, 1987 shooting outside a Brooklyn disco. Authorities claim Edwards gunned down a 22-year-old man outside the club because the man didn't give him enough room to dance. That allegation became part of Uzi's legend. Federal prosecutors used stories like Allwood's to paint Edwards not just as a dealer, but as a boss who ruled through terror. The government said this was how discipline worked inside the Rankers posse. Short the money, get beaten. Steal from the stash, disappear. Make the boss look weak, pay in blood. Even innocent bystanders didn't stand a chance. Prosecutors said one victim was beaten and shot after being mistaken for his twin brother. Another victim was a young woman shot when she opened the door at a friend's apartment. Another shooting left 11 innocent bystanders wounded and a man paralyzed for life. That was the real cost of the crack era. The headlines focused on the kingpins, but the neighborhoods paid the bill. The Rankers posse didn't survive on violence alone. Its greatest asset was the logistics. The girlfriends, aunts, fake names and apartment storage spots. People willing to look away, people too scared to ask questions, people who knew exactly what was happening but tell themselves it's not their business. This is how a street empire breathes, through other people's silence. But no empire breathes forever. By March 1988, federal agents and police were moving. More than 30 officers took part in raids targeting Edwards and other members of the organization. Edwards was arrested along with several others, with authorities describing the raid as a major blow against one of Brooklyn's most violent crack rings. The charges included murders, attempted murders, and kidnapping. Federal prosecutors accused Edwards of heading a group that made enormous money while turning Brooklyn blocks into shooting galleries. Around the same period, federal agencies were launching wider operations such as Rum Punch on Jamaican posses nationwide. The message from law enforcement was clear. This was no longer a local Brooklyn problem, this was a national crisis. But for the people on Edwards' block, the national headlines came a little too late. A whole generation had watched the corners quickly change. The old men had already stopped sitting outside after dark, and too many people had already been buried. The federal trial opened in 1989. Edwards was now 30 years old. In court, newspaper accounts described him far differently from the monster image prosecutors painted. He wore suits, he sat quietly, and at sentencing he said nothing. That contrast became part of the unease, because the man on trial didn't look anything like the violence described in testimony. He looked controlled, still, and watchful. One of the most important witnesses against Edwards was Kenneth Bud Manning, as he knew the inner workings of the operation best. Having his own criminal history, he agreed to testify against Edwards as part of a deal. His testimony was detrimental as it brought the jury inside the ranker's posse. Because the government didn't need Manning to make Edwards look flashy. They needed him to make Edwards look organized. Because the goal of the government was to prove a continuing criminal enterprise, not just a handful of disconnected street crimes. A killer himself, Manning admitted to being cautious of Edwards too, stating Edwards had tried to kill him too, shooting at him 6 times and missing. When the verdict finally came in on July 25, 1989, Edwards was found guilty. Sentencing came a few months later on December 1, 1989. Delroy Uzi Edwards stood before U.S. District Judge Raymond J. Deary in Brooklyn Federal Court. The streets had already judged him. The newspaper had already named him. Now the courts would bury him in time. Judge Deary sentenced Edwards to 7 consecutive life terms, plus additional prison time, and also imposed a $1 million fine. At sentencing, the judge reflected on the waste of it all. Intelligence, leadership, street smarts, all poured into destruction. He said he wished the sentencing could have happened outside on a Brooklyn corner so young people could see what the lifestyle really offered. Because when you follow the story to the end, past the nightclub rumors and the street mythology, past the headlines and the mug shots, it almost always leads to the same place: a courtroom, a sentence, a body count, a mother crying, a neighborhood damaged, and a man who thought fear made him untouchable, until 12 jurors, shaken but not silent, said guilty. See, crack didn't create every wound in Brooklyn, but it poured poison into open wounds, and Delroy Uzi Edwards helped turn that poison into profit.